Black Death, 1347 to 1351, reduced the workforce, increasing wages and social mobility. Introduction: the plague that shaped history. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, swept across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. The disease, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis and transmitted by fleas on rats, killed an estimated 25 to 30 million people in Europe alone, nearly one-third of the population. While the immediate impact was catastrophic, the long-term consequences were far-reaching, fundamentally reshaping social, economic, and cultural landscapes. Despite the horrors it brought, the Black Death inadvertently led to significant changes in the workforce, wages, and social mobility, especially in Europe, setting the stage for major shifts in the medieval economy and society. 1. The devastating impact of the Black Death. The spread of the plague. The Black Death originated in Central Asia and spread westward along trade routes, including the Silk Road. By 1347, it reached the Mediterranean ports, including Kaffa and Crimea, from where it spread rapidly throughout Europe. Ships carrying infected rats and fleas brought the plague to major European cities, including Genoa, Venice, and Marseilles, and it soon spread inland. The plague's symptoms were gruesome. Victims developed buboes, painfully swollen lymph nodes, fever, chills, and weakness. It spread so quickly that entire towns were wiped out within a matter of days, leaving entire regions depopulated. Urban areas, particularly those with high population densities, were especially vulnerable. Social and economic destruction. As death tolls soared, economies began to collapse. With such a massive loss of life, entire communities were disrupted. Trade came to a halt, fields went untended, and industries suffered from severe labor shortages. Villages and cities saw a dramatic loss of workers, and the agricultural, industrial, and trade sectors were particularly hard hit. But in the midst of this crisis, something unexpected occurred. The reduction of the workforce led to changes that would permanently alter the structure of medieval society. 2. Economic shifts. Increased wages and demand for labor. Labor shortage and rising wages. With so many people dead, the labor force was drastically reduced. This sudden scarcity of workers gave surviving laborers a significant amount of power. Serfs, the peasants bound to the land in a system of manorialism, found themselves in a unique position. For the first time, their labor became invaluable, and they were able to demand higher wages for their work. Farmers, artisans, and workers in cities had the upper hand when negotiating with landowners, merchants, and nobility. This shift is seen as a turning point in medieval economics, where the feudal system began to weaken. Serfs and peasants could now move freely to seek better opportunities, particularly as landowners struggled to fill vacancies and maintain productivity. The breakdown of feudalism. Feudalism, which had previously kept peasants tied to the land under harsh conditions, began to lose its grip in the wake of the Black Death. Nobles found it harder to maintain control over laborers as the workers became more mobile and assertive. The economic shift also led to the rise of a new class of wealthy merchants and landowners, who capitalized on the changing economic landscape. The Black Death helped to undermine the feudal system by enabling peasants and laborers to command better terms for their labor. This laid the groundwork for the development of more market-oriented economies in Europe, where labor was increasingly treated as a commodity, with an intrinsic value tied to supply and demand. 3. Social mobility. A new social structure emerges. Increased opportunities for serfs and peasants. The massive depopulation caused by the Black Death gave surviving serfs and peasants a newfound social mobility. In many regions, labor shortages meant that previously oppressed peasants could leave their manor and seek better opportunities in towns or on more prosperous estates. The availability of land for rent or purchase became more accessible, and workers who had previously been bound by the rigid structures of feudal society could now break free. For the first time in centuries, serfs were able to negotiate better living and working conditions. In some areas, peasants even gained ownership of land, something that had been virtually impossible under the feudal system before the Black Death. The rise of a new middle class. As workers gained more economic power, new social classes began to emerge. The gap between the nobility and the lower classes started to narrow, as an emerging middle class of skilled workers, tradespeople, and merchants found more opportunities to increase their wealth and status. In cities, this new class was able to accumulate wealth through commerce, trade, and craftsmanship. The increased social mobility helped create more dynamic, diverse societies, where people's social status was increasingly determined by their wealth and skills, rather than by birth or inherited land. 4. The impact on the church and religious life. Religious crisis and reform. The Black Death also led to a crisis in religious life. As millions perished, many began to question the church's power and its ability to protect people from such devastation. The failure of the clergy to provide answers or alleviate suffering led to a decline in the church's authority and influence. People began to seek more personal spiritual connections, and new religious movements began to gain traction. In some areas, a growing sense of disillusionment with the church fueled the desire for reform, which would eventually culminate in the Protestant Reformation in the 16th century. 5. The long-term effects. The end of the medieval era. The decline of manorialism and feudalism. The Black Death marked a definitive shift from the medieval era to the early modern period. With a declining population and a more mobile workforce, the old feudal order that had structured Europe for centuries began to erode. Lords could no longer rely on the labor of peasants tied to the land. Instead, they had to negotiate and compete for workers. The rise in wages, combined with increasing urbanization, contributed to the eventual rise of capitalism and the decline of the traditional manorial system that had dominated rural life in the medieval period. The birth of modern Europe. The social and economic upheavals caused by the Black Death led to profound changes in European society. In addition to the rise of a more capitalistic economy, the decline of feudalism and the growing social mobility paved the way for the Renaissance, the Age of Exploration, and the Scientific Revolution. This period of transformation would be one of the most important in shaping the modern world. A tragic catalyst for change, the Black Death remains one of the most tragic events in history, claiming millions of lives and plunging Europe into crisis. Yet in the wake of such devastation, it played a key role in shaping modern Europe. By disrupting the traditional social and economic order, it led to a dramatic shift in the balance of power between the laboring classes and the elite, encouraged social mobility, and weakened the foundations of feudalism. While the immediate effects of the Black Death were devastating, the long-term consequences contributed to the emergence of a new social order, with increased wages, greater mobility, and the foundations of modern economic structures that would continue to evolve in the centuries that followed. Age of Exploration. 15th to 17th century open global trade networks. Introduction. The dawn of global exploration. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, the Age of Exploration reshaped the world. This period, driven by the ambition for wealth, land, and power, saw European nations embarking on voyages that would expand their influence across the globe. Known also as the Age of Discovery, this era marked the opening of global trade routes and the establishment of an interconnected world economy that laid the foundation for the modern global system. The explorers, merchants, and navigators of this period, such as Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan, sought new territories, trade routes, and opportunities, while simultaneously encountering new cultures and exchanging goods, ideas, and technologies. But the Age of Exploration was not just about the opening of new trade routes. It also led to colonization, the rise of imperialism, and the exploitation of indigenous peoples across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. 1. The drivers of exploration. Economic motivations. The primary motive behind European exploration was economic. By the late Middle Ages, European nations, especially Portugal and Spain, were seeking new sources of wealth. Traditional trade routes, including the Silk Road, were long and dangerous, often controlled by powerful intermediaries like the Ottoman Empire. This meant higher prices for luxury goods like spices, silk, and precious metals. European nations wanted direct access to these resources, which were in high demand back home. Moreover, new navigational technology, like the astrolabe, compass, and caravel ships, made long sea voyages possible, allowing for faster and more efficient travel. Religious and cultural motivations. In addition to economic reasons, religious zeal played a significant role. The Catholic Church was eager to spread Christianity across the world. Many explorers saw themselves not only as traders or conquerors, but also as missionaries. For example, Bartolomé Dias and Vasco da Gama both had goals of expanding Christianity while seeking trade routes. Additionally, the Renaissance had rekindled an interest in humanism, learning, and the exploration of the unknown. The combination of curiosity about the world and the desire for global influence spurred the exploration of new lands. 2 key figures and discoveries. Christopher Columbus, 1492. One of the most famous explorers of the Age of Exploration, Christopher Columbus sailed under the Spanish flag in search of a westward route to Asia. In 1492, Columbus accidentally discovered the Americas, though he believed he had reached the East Indies. His voyages opened the New World to European colonization and trade, though Columbus' discoveries were not the first encounters with the Americas. His expeditions are often seen as the beginning of sustained European contact with the Americas. Vasco da Gama, 1498. In 1498, Vasco da Gama made history when he successfully sailed around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa and reached India. This established a direct sea route to Asia, bypassing the overland trade routes controlled by the Ottoman Empire. Da Gama's journey marked the beginning of Portuguese dominance in the Indian Ocean trade and solidified the nation's economic and colonial power in the region. Ferdinand Magellan, 1519 to 1522. The first expedition to circumnavigate the globe was led by Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese explorer sailing under the Spanish flag. Though Magellan himself did not survive the entire journey, his expedition proved that the Earth was round and that it was possible to sail all the way around it. His journey contributed greatly to European knowledge of the world's geography and further strengthened European maritime dominance. 3. The Age of Global Trade Networks. The opening of trade routes. The Age of Exploration had an immediate and lasting impact on global trade. European countries, especially Portugal, Spain, England, and the Netherlands, established sea routes that connected Europe with the Americas, Africa, and Asia. The transatlantic trade connected Europe with the Americas, resulting in the flow of gold, silver, tobacco, and sugar back to Europe. The Indian Ocean trade linked Europe with India, China, and the Southeast Asian islands, bringing spices, silks, tea, and other valuable commodities to European markets. The Atlantic slave trade, though dark and tragic, was a byproduct of these trade routes, involving the forced transportation of millions of Africans to the Americas to work on plantations and in mines. These new trade networks led to the exchange of goods, but also the exchange of ideas, technologies, and even diseases, such as smallpox, between the continents, creating what would become the global economy. The Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange refers to the widespread transfer of plants, animals, people, and cultures between the New World, the Americas, and the Old World, Europe, Asia, and Africa. It brought profound changes to agriculture and society. For example, crops like potatoes, maize, and tomatoes from the Americas transformed diets in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Horses, cattle, and pigs were introduced to the Americas, changing indigenous ways of life. Diseases, including smallpox and measles, devastated indigenous populations in the Americas, contributing to the downfall of many indigenous societies. 4. The consequences of exploration, colonization, and imperialism. The rise of European colonies. As trade flourished, European powers sought to establish colonies in the lands they had discovered. The Spanish Empire claimed vast territories in the Americas, while the Portuguese Empire established colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Indian Ocean. Other European powers, including France, England, and the Netherlands, followed suit, seeking to control lucrative trade routes and territories. The Spanish Empire was particularly focused on exploiting the resources of the Americas, particularly gold and silver, while also converting indigenous populations to Christianity. The British and Dutch established lucrative colonial holdings, such as New England and the Dutch East Indies, focusing on trade and establishing lucrative companies like the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company. The impact on indigenous peoples. While exploration and colonization brought great wealth to European nations, it also led to the exploitation and displacement of indigenous peoples across the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Colonizers introduced new diseases that decimated native populations, and many were enslaved or forced into labor on plantations and in mines. The consequences for native populations were catastrophic. In the Americas, millions of indigenous peoples died due to disease, warfare, and exploitation. In Africa, the slave trade reached devastating proportions, with millions of Africans being forcibly removed from their homeland and sold into slavery in the Americas. The enduring legacy of the Age of Exploration. The Age of Exploration was a transformative period that connected distant continents and opened up new trade networks. But it was also marked by exploitation, conflict, and profound change. It set in motion the rise of European imperialism, the globalization of trade, and the spread of both European culture and Christianity across the world. The voyages of Columbus, da Gama, Magellan, and others changed the world forever, leading to the establishment of powerful empires and the beginning of the modern globalized economy. While the consequences of this era were not without suffering, the foundations of global trade, cultural exchange, and economic interdependence were firmly established during the Age of Exploration, and they continue to shape our world today.